Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpattykake. I am an author and robot, and it is gonna be the last video of 2020. Now, I was going back and forth on what I wanted to do as the last video of 2020. The last video of 2019 was kind of a catch-up and sort of projection post video of future endeavors. I did not even go back to see what I wanted to do this year at the same time last year. And I thought about doing some kind of video like that again to talk about, the successes of this year and to set goals for next year. But I didn't know how interesting that would really be. So in honor of it being New Year's Eve, I would like to invite anybody who watches this channel who is a creative or would like to become creative to drop down in the comments below and let me know what your successes this year were and some of your vague goals, or if you've got more solid goals, let me know what some of your goals are next year. So, one, we got that energy out in the universe that says, hey, I've said what I want to make happen. So then it's slightly more likely to happen. And then two, we can just kind of share with each other what we're doing and build a community. This year I wrote one full-length play, a couple of short 10-minute plays, a first draft of a sci-fi called, I think it's Head in the Dust right now is what its working title is, and I don't know Air to the Dust. Air to the Dust is the name of that, and it's going to be a duology. I don't have the full story figured out for the second book, but first draft of the second book is on the docket for next year. I also got a first draft in of Cain and Abel, and I am currently working on a first draft of a book called Bleed More, Body More, which is a supernatural thriller. It needs some stuff though. Considering how many first drafts I worked on this year, my other goals for this year had been to edit Creatures Lie Here and make it able to be, put it in a state where other people could read it. That did not happen. So the majority of next year is going to be all about revising, because I have about 5 novels now that are ready for revision, and they need to be revised so they can get readers so that I can do the reader revisions. And that's not even counting a book I have that is called Where is the Blue Sky? That's its current working title. And that's a huge sci-fi. I think right now it's 160,000 words, and it doesn't need to be anywhere near that long. It needs a major rewrite. And about a little less than a month ago, I started getting ideas for the big parts that needed to be restructured. And so hopefully, and the missing parts from it. Because when I wrote it originally back in 2016, early 2017, I was missing a major part of the story, and I didn't know how to fix it, and I didn't know what to do with that part. And over the couple of years that it's just kind of been sitting, ideas have come and gone for it, and characters have developed, and then over this last month, different ideas that actually made sense with some of these smaller ideas started to form. And so I think I can actually start working on that book again, and I love that book, I love that universe. And so I hope that I can get that done. So I have 5 books that I would like to work on next year for revision. I don't know if I'm going to get to all of them. 5 books for revision and at least 1 for something brand new. 1 first draft, sorry. But that's a duology first draft. So at least it's not completely new world building. And those are my goals. I have a novella that I wanted to write this year, but it is not happening this year. I always do a soft goal and a hard goal. And my soft goal is going to have 3 of the 5 novels revised enough that they can be given to readers to figure out what the next phase of edits needs to be like. And my hard goal would be to revise all 5. At least twice. I would say one of my good successes, and then I'm going to get off of me because this video isn't about me. I want to hear what your successes are for listening to me talk about my successes. But I would also say one of my successes this year has been being able to more or less keep up with the YouTube videos, and I really enjoy making them, and I really enjoy I've really enjoyed this year getting to know more people in the indie creative industry and talk to writers off of Twitter, because Twitter is so toxic. Like, I did a video last week about Authors of Parlor, and the people over there are really so nice, and it's really nice to actually get to talk to people who just want to create art, who enjoy art, and I highly doubt we all agree on just about anything. But everybody is so nice, and so I've really enjoyed this year getting to know other creatives again and not having that pressure of political correctness with it, and that's after getting kicked out of another writing group for wrong thing. Anyway, let me know what your year was like in the comments down below. Let me know what your hopes are for 2021, and we can hopefully maybe be cheerleaders. And if you have any stories or subjects that you would like me to cover next year, always remember that the comments are open, or my email is open from my website, which is linked down below, and I will do my best to help with whatever information I have or can get. So I really do appreciate knowing what helps you so that I can do my best to help people. Anyway, but before we get started, today is seriously your last chance to get in your fiction for January's Lemois. Last month I asked you. It is in the description down below under January submission. Click the link, follow the guidelines, and submit something, and it will be read in the first video of January 2021. So this is seriously your last chance. So today, submit it today. And if you haven't already, buy my book. So those are my two things. Now on with the thing. Over this year, at some point during this year, I learned about race fail. Somebody left a comment on a video forever ago talking about a couple of people involved in race fail, and there was some drama going on Twitter, and I had never heard of race fail before, and I don't even remember what the drama actually was at the time, but I started looking up names and I came across race fail. And if you're not sure what race fail is, welcome. You are in the right place. So before we had the RWA shit show and the RWA meltdown, we had the sci-fi fantasy race fail. Oh, it's good. And by good, I mean ridiculous. So let's get into this. This is not gonna this is a response post to it, and then I want to give you this, and then I'm gonna go and tell you exactly what the controversy was over race fail, and then I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on it. So this post is for MLK Day. It's also prompted by the coincidental approximate anniversary of race fail, which began this January of last year. For those who want the Twitter version, race fail was a several months long conversation about race in the context of science fiction and fantasy that sprawled across the blogosphere. It involved several thousands of participants and spawned several hundreds of essays, and it hasn't really ended yet, just slowed down. This post was from 2010, by the way. But the initial burst was very frank and frequently very heated, and over the course of the whole thing, a number of well-known or influential personalities in the field said things that revealed problematic assumptions / thinking about people of color or race issues in general, hence the fail suffix. Since then, I've been to a lot of conventions and readings, chatted with other authors, editors, publishers on mailing lists and in person, and I've started to notice changes that I attribute to race fail's fallout. First, the personal. I suspect the increased awareness of SFF zeitgeist race issues has helped the 100,000 Kingdoms get more attention, since it's an epic fantasy written by a writer of color with a protagonist of color. Can't complain about that. Also, I've seen a number of conventions dedicate panels and programming tracks, or in some cases a whole con, to discussing race and trying to attract many fans of color. People are quicker to raise objections now than when anthologies or awards purporting to survey the field for underrepresented women and people of color, and the usual silly defenses, maybe there just weren't any, insert group, writing good sci-fi fantasy, don't fly as far. Writers are thinking more about what they write and the unexamined assumptions that might be in their work. Readers are thinking about why their bookshelves might contain an overabundance of white male authors and protagonists. And back to the personal, I feel more comfortable being myself now than ever before, after more than 20 years of being a fan and aspiring writer in the field. Used to be that I was the only brown face in a room full of Used to be I was the only brown face in the room at most sci-fi fantasy events and gatherings. Used to be even I thought this was normal and that I was some kind of rarity, even though practically every other person of color I know, including family and significant others, was a fan of sci-fi fantasy in some form. One of the most powerful moments for me in Race Fail was when the participating fans of color decided to do an informal roll call and illustrate just how non-rare we were. It used to be I ground my teeth and kept silent when hearing fellow fans say asinine, bigoted things because the whole room seemed to agree with them and I didn't feel safe or brave enough to raise an objection. It used to be I fended off half a dozen hands reaching out to touch my hair on my way through every dealer's room. Used to be I considered sci-fi fantasy events work necessary for the sake of my writing career. I mean, I consider every conference I go to work. Is this not supposed to be a thing? Does this mean that I am oppressed? Somebody, please help me. Something to be grimly endured, not enjoyed. I mean, that's especially the part of any conference where it's everybody is at the bar. And it used to be very noticeable that I could at least broach the subject of race in every other aspect of my life, academia and counseling, psych field, political activism, of course, literature and art in general, but not in sci-fi fantasy. The conversations would simply shut down, often thanks to respected personages/fans who would emphatically declare that there was no racism in the genre outside of a few unimportant loudmouths and no need to discuss race since there was no racism. So let's move on to something interesting like quantum physics. Is this sounding familiar to you? Yeah, this is the murder, the die of sci-fi fantasy that just went through the romance writers of America. Now suddenly everyone is talking about, look, writing is not about race. And when you take something like writing, or, let's talk about clay, or let's talk about painting, or let's talk about fixing cars. When you turn it to be about race, you're taking away from what it really is about. And not everything needs to be revolved around race. In fact, almost nothing should be revolved around race. Your personal issues, you can talk about those being influenced or whatever by your race, but there should not be full writing conferences that are specifically about race. There shouldn't be panels that are only about race and talking about race involved in sci-fi. There's learning how to write somebody that's unlike you, and then there's completely obsessing with specifically not being white and making everything about not being white, and there's no place for that in writing. There's a place for empathy because every character you write who isn't you is going to have different experiences, and that's something that you need to learn how to do as a writer. Whether it's because of race or criminality or personality or sex or family or upbringing, any of that is going to create a different person. There is no reason to specifically obsess about race. This is the takeover of organizations using race to hustle and destroy organizations. Here's the thing. A lot of people that I've met in the past year, clarification, a lot of white people seem to think that fail part of race fail lay in the fact that it occurred at all. It was too angry for anything productive to happen, they say. Isn't that how it always is? It's a hostile takeover situation. There's a time and place for such conversations, but not now. There's a way to have such conversations, but not like this. Yeah, because you don't have a productive conversation when you're blaming somebody else for all of the woes of your life because you were afraid or you didn't want to talk up or you felt ashamed of yourself because of your race. That sounds like an inferiority complex on your side. There's no helpful conversation happening when you demonize somebody, especially you demonize a whole bunch of people because of their immutable characteristics, i.e. race. The gist of the objections seems to lie in the belief that sci-fi fantasy would have begun the changes that I've experienced this year, even if race fail had never occurred. The people involved could have raised their objections in a calm and reasoned manner, at which point respectful conversations would have taken place and the genre would have listened. Let's be honest here. Sci-fi fantasy has always been the most progressive genre up front. I mean, not to say that romance isn't, because romance plus sci-fi is usually what pushes the envelope. That's how you end up with the first interracial kiss on television being on Star Trek. That's also how you end up with race issues being talked about, or even civil rights being talked about via different alien species, or when you include AI systems. You have all of these same issues that are usually considered progressive issues moved through sci-fi. So I actually think that it's kind of asinine to pretend that sci-fi has ever had this super bigotry issue. For the majority of the last decades especially, it's just mostly been dudes that were interested in sci-fi. Like, you got made fun of for going to a sci-fi convention because you were some loser D&D player or whatever. It was the lovers of sci-fi fantasy that were picked on in school for the longest time, but now they're saying, I'm oppressed because I like sci-fi fantasy and I'm not white. If we didn't, she goes on, if we didn't need race veil, then why did it occur? Because people are controlling jerks. And the angry questions that it raised didn't emerge from a vacuum. They've been here all along and had many cases been expressly already. W.E.B. Du Bois was one of the first black sci-fi fantasy writers, and his stories, written over 100 years ago, asked these questions then. I've seen essays from Octavia Butler, Samuel Delany, Johanna Russ, and many others which directly address all of it, often in calm, reasoned language, using the most delicate of tones. These conversations have taken place since before I was born, so why have I not seen the sci-fi fantasy culture change significantly until 2009? The year before we maybe make contact. Aren't they talking about aliens? So she says race veil was a good thing and it was necessary. Of course, they always do. And then we get into the language that obviously sounds kind of like a communist's language. Some of you may have heard of Lewis's classic theory of change. Paraphrasing broadly, Lewin posited that a stable organization systems inherently resist significant change, mostly due to inertia. They're frozen in place by the weight of their own history, the comfort of tradition, the participants who have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, and so on. And so the only way to enact change in such a system is destabilization. Hey, yeah, have you heard of this here? 4 stages of ideological subversion: demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. They always go for this. They always do this. And Yuri Bezmenov was a former KGB agent, and he talked about subversion of political structures, of any sort of structures, and this is how you do it. That's why they always try to demoralize and destabilize. So, kind of always be weary. They use the same tactics everywhere they go. It's not hard to spot them. And they use the same language pretty much everywhere, too. The way I see it, the race veil was a big thaw for the science fiction fantasy field. Fans of color and white fans who were tired of the old ways literally heated things up with the outpouring of long-pent rage. A lot of the time, this long-pent rage is feelings that you deserve something that you don't have, but you didn't work for it. But it's that narcissistic person of, I should have everything that I want and it should just be handed to me. That fury was utterly necessary because it shocked the whole genre enough to make it pay attention. No, it terrorized the genre, friend. Without that, science fiction fantasy would have remained resistant, frozen against such radical ideas as, why are all these futuristic stories full of white people? Because they're written by white people. When they're already a minority on a planet now. Yeah, also, I would say a lot of dystopian that I've ever seen, majority of dystopian I've ever seen, are actually multi-culti societies. So I don't know what this is talking about. You're just focusing on the target that you want to eliminate, and this is sketchy as frick, just so you know. But you can never do anything right. They say, why are there all of these white people in this story written by white people? And then you try to write a story that has other races in it, and they go, you're appropriating, you didn't do this right, you're not allowed to write that, stay in your lane, blah, blah. There's no winning, so it's who cares? But you're not allowed to dictate, and I say this as I'm telling you what you're not allowed to do. You have no right to dictate how or what other people write. You get to choose what you read, that's for sure, but you don't get to tell other people how to write or what to write. And so getting mad that other people are writing stories about white people, okay, go write the stories that you want to read, and write them well, because it's not just an excuse to say, well, no, they just didn't submit any good stories. Sometimes people don't submit stories. That's just how it is. Sometimes people don't have an interest. We are still in the warming period for now. Still realizing the extent of the problem, cataloging the damage done, starting up preventative therapy for the future. This is, oh my gosh, talk about dystopian. When the inevitable refreezing occurs, I have no idea what the new sci-fi fantasy will look like. Browner, definitely. She straight up says that it's about getting rid of white people. Right there. Right there. I don't know what the new science fiction fantasy is going to look like, but it's definitely browner. Can you imagine if somebody was like, I cannot imagine what the new Brazil will look like, but it's definitely whiter. I cannot imagine. And then she says, because of the thing Lewin realized over the course of his research, cultures that don't go through a periodic unfreezing process, they die. Yeah, and somebody that goes through this also, they die. So I say, bring on the next fail. I know it's painful, but so was the old system, and it's going to take a lot of work to fix that. I know it's going to hurt you to do what I want, but you have to do what I want. You have to do what I want. That's what this sounds like, basically. I, for one, can't wait to see the results of my utopian genre dream now. I wanted to read you that so that you could imagine in your mind what exactly this person is complaining about. What kind of heck crap show would need to go down that it would just change the landscape of sci-fi fantasy for ever to come. And you can definitely credit this for just how much of the sci-fi fantasy industry has been pushed towards radical racism and race theory in everything that they do. This has been behind all of the changes in the awards shows, in the conferences, in the focuses for sci-fi fantasy. This has been behind it, which is the radical takeover and a focus specifically on race, a racial hierarchy, if you will. So what exactly happened to cause this race fail? Here we've got the key events. On January 12th, 2009, professional sci-fi fantasy author Elizabeth Bear posted some writing advice in her live journal, when live journal was the thing, entitled, "Whatever you're doing, you're probably wrong." This was most likely a response to fantasy author Jay Lake's Another Shot at Thinking About the Other. In her post, in Elizabeth Bear's post, she provided her formula for writing the other without being a dick, a process she defines as simple but not so easy. Writing the Other is a book by professional sci-fi authors Nisi Shaw and Cynthia Ward, which later became a writing workshop. Neither Bear nor Lake's post reference this work directly, although both are using the styling in the title and text, blah, blah, blah. Briefly, Elizabeth Bear's advice she had two key pieces of advice that she gave for writing people, unlike yourself, writing the other without being a dick. This was what made everybody shoot off. Her advice number one for writing the other was, don't think of the other as the other. Begin by seeing people as people, regardless of gender, nationality, color, etc. Not shiny, exotic, cute, ethnic people, just people. And then her advice number two is, when you write about the people who are other or different from yourself, consult people who you know, who live what you are writing about. If you have a Catholic character in your story, for instance, learn about Catholicism and talk to Catholic people. Those were her two key pieces of advice for writing the other that set race fail ablaze. And this is what this woman on this other blog was talking about, why the complaints that needed to come out. So Elizabeth Bear's advice was passed around after that, and on January 13th, 2009, Deepa D wrote, "I didn't dream of dragons" on LiveJournal. That was her essay response. She clarified that the essay was not responding to writing the other, but rather that it was based on her personal emotional reactions to Bear's words, her reactions to imagine people unlike you are actually people, and research what you're writing about. That was her response. Most epic fantasy is set in standard fantasy settings, Europe or quasi-European environments. Many familiar character types and situations have no equivalents in other cultures. Deepa ran into this problem when she tried to write such a fantasy set in ancient India, which lacked, for example, European-style road taverns and dragons. That's when you would start looking for works that are probably from other countries and they're translated. Just so you know, because it's only, you're going to, in a European, historically European country, whether it's actually Europe or it's America, you're going to have stories that are inspired by the background of the people who were there. And that's just going to be what's more common. And the United States has been majority white for most of its existence, if not all of its existence up until recently-ish. Deepa D also said, in colonized nations such as India, children are thoroughly educated in a dominant culture's language, imagery, and values. Even when they are allowed to speak their own language, their reading is all in the dominant culture's language and portrays a dominant cultural value. Their thinking is so informed so early so that it becomes their identity, and they have little or no sense of their own culture. Also, colonized nations lack the resources that are available to the ruling nations. In this situation, stop complaining and write your own is meaningless. There may not be a paper or pencil available, and the only one of or two publishing houses which can afford to publish a limited number of books. So she's complaining that, okay, so you're telling me if I don't see the book that I want to read, then write it myself, but I can't do that because I don't have the money to publish it. That's a loser attitude, and you cannot blame other people for not writing the books that you want to read. Write them. Seriously, we all have to deal with this. I don't see books that I want to read all the time, and so you know what? I'm going to write them. I don't understand how this advice that everybody gets told suddenly becomes racist if it's told to somebody because of their color. Everybody gets the same advice. Then the third gist of the essay that Deepa posted was, there is a disturbing trend in modern Western fantasy literature of appropriating African and Native American and Asian characters and character types and reinterpreting them through a European fantasy lens. So you're not allowed to take ideas. I don't want to ever freaking see somebody that's not white then take ideas from European fairy tales. Oh wait, that's constantly happening. So again, stupid. You're allowed to appropriate whatever you want. It happens to everybody. No more Cinderella stories featuring anybody that's not white. I'm just saying. If that's the rule, I'm just saying. But this is what caused the explosion. Then we move on to a response from Elizabeth. Then we move on to the response, the larger response to Elizabeth Bear's two pieces of advice, which I remind you are research what you're doing and think of people not like you as if they're real people. Because they are. Somebody else responded to Elizabeth Bear with, it says what she was an Afro-Trinidadian blogger named Avalon's Willow that addressed fantasy writers in denial about stereotypes of Black and Native American men in their works. She said, quote, "It's about my personal confusion that an author so highly spoken of by people I respect would write about a magical Negro who gets bridled by a white woman after trying to kill and eat another white woman, and to my horror becoming some sort of beast of burden, big buck protector. My horror at watching the humiliation of yet another Black man is so that a white woman can be empowered in front of her peers." You're writing a character. No character. This is also such a problem with the neuroses within the creative community in particular, but just no individual character is a representative of everybody who has some kind of shared identity. It is that character telling that story. It is not you. And if you see somebody that is has a shared characteristic with you and you think that it is representing you, you have a problem. You have a difficulty separating reality from fiction, and you might need some help. The comments to Bear's post soon filled with a great deal of critical response, positive and negative, criticism, anger. Every possible tenor and tone was represented. Some of the discussion focused on the content of Bear's posts and some on the form and content of those critical of her posts, and then some in turn on the form and content of their responses, where everybody was fighting each other. Many of Bear's personal friends, other authors, and fans participated. As the post, and are we going to talk about anybody else who responded in this and their friends and family and fans that participated in this vitriol? Bear added several ETAs that included rebuttals and refinements for the comments. She also deleted certain comments and deleted certain comments and posts, although she restored them later. On January 1st, in another post on Bear's journal, Sparky Monster calls on Bear to address the way she allowed her friends and supporters to behave in the comments on her journal. So now this author is the parent for her fans or anybody that posts on her journal and shares their opinion in this conversation. This person is literally asking for censorship and blaming the author for not censoring those who posted comments on her blog. No. Later, N.K. Jemison offered a critique of some part of Bear's posts in the comments, which Bear edited into her post. See, look, and Bear was apparently willing to listen and take criticism. So, after pro-author McAllister Stone made a post characterizing the conversation and its participants as abusive, pro-editor and fan critic Patrick Nielsen Hayden became involved, saying, "I wouldn't even split the problem into authors and readers. Some people are smarter than others, to put it as baldly as possible," which, true fact, but some people just don't like to hear that some people are smarter than others, or some people are better at something than others. When the commentary on his post became upsetting to him, Nielsen Hayden deleted his live journal, of course, because that's always what happens, is you make a comment and then you get insulted, and this is cancel culture in 2010, by the way. Teresa Nielsen Hayden further argued that because of many people involved in the discussion used pseudonyms, the conversation was meaningless. Many fans were dismayed by her rudeness and lack of respect for the practices of persistent pseudonymity, which has been an essential part of online fan culture for years. So again, this is obviously cancel culture from 10 years ago, before it was really popular, and like, I understand pseudonymity and the importance of having posting anonymous, because the abusers want to know who you are so they can find where you work or they can try to ruin your life. And if you have a pseudonym, they don't know who you are. I can also recognize that when people have no weight tied to their name, they feel like they can more or less be bigger jerks because that's not recognized as them. That doesn't mean that you force people to say who they are. It's better to be anonymous and have to deal with some levels of abuse or vitriol and just learn how to cool it when you're reading that kind of stuff than to try to force everybody to not be anonymous. Author Will Shetterly argued that class prejudice was more significant than racism, and when the argument between Shetterly and feminist blogger Coffee and Dink became heated, he and author critic Catherine Kramer outed Coffee and Drink, linking her LiveJournal handle with her legal name. Shetterly and Kramer justified their actions by pointing out that she had previously used her legal name in public posts on her LiveJournal. A huge argument later ensued, threatening to eclipse the original discussion about racism. Coffee and Dink ultimately responded to the outing issue that, quote, an outrageous derailment of the original conversation about race and racism in science fiction. She disconnected the derailment to the very nature of the sci-fi fandom as so insular, so white-focused, and so white-dominant that some of the people involved can ignore the literally dozens of people involved in the argument about race, the literally hundreds of posts made out of the conviction that race is not the issue when it's people of colors that say it. Or you're just getting some other perspectives. Why is it that everything else has to be dropped? If a certain person of a specific race says something, then this is how it must be because a specific person of a specific race said it. How about we actually have a discussion and we look at what you think, what the opposite of you thinks, and then also look for visible sensory data that either confirms or denies individual claims. Not saying that somebody of one side entirely is correct or somebody of the other side is entirely correct, but how about we look at all sides and then also look at evidence instead of this whole shutdown thing of, look, you have to listen to me because I'm the correct race that you have to listen to when we talk about this. That sounds like racism. In a separate post, Coffee and Dink said, but as reprehensible and as painful for me personally, Will and Catherine's behavior has been, and as deserving of censure she wants punishment, I do not want people to lose sight of the fact that this isn't simply a case of individual people acting poorly or even individual people performing racist actions. It would be easy for white people to say science fiction isn't racist, a couple of people just overreacted. Why should we suddenly just believe you that science fiction is racist? It's not. Sorry, it's not. But this overreaction comes out of and depends on white privilege and racism as a social institution, system of thought, and systems of power and oppression. The racism in science fiction, the ongoing erasure and denial of the people of color who are right here and speaking about their representation and misrepresentation is not the property of two individuals. So if I say Get Out by, what is it, Keegan-Michael Key, was a misrepresentation and a lack of proper representation of white people in media, do I get listened to because I'm the right color to talk about it? Or how does this exactly work? Is it if I just see something that I don't like that sort of vaguely connects with me, then I become the authority on it and you have to listen to me complain because I am obviously correct? You don't have to like something. And if you don't like something, it doesn't mean that it's automatically racist. Again, this was 10 years ago, but we're seeing this exact same thing come to head in so many other genres, this exact same thing. And it's also just people saying, I don't like that, it should be canceled, you should be canceled, and because I don't like it, and the color of my race, you should have to listen to me. Asian blogger Cedar Press said they are attempting to intimidate and silence those who challenge them because they don't like what we have to say, and they don't think that we have a right to say it. No, disagreement, like this is one of the things that bothers me with the leftist people, is you disagree with them and they act like they don't have a right to say it, but then they will actively try to cancel you and get you kicked out of the actual town square, like get you kicked off of Twitter or kicked off of YouTube or kicked out of your job and say, oh no, you have freedom of speech, but that doesn't mean freedom of consequence. Okay, but you consider when you get disagreed with as you not having the right to speak. You having the right to speak means I have the right to disagree with you. Now, I'm not going to try to ruin your job or your life because I disagree with you. But there are like some completely different standards going on in this. The president of Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America initially jumped on the bandwagon with angry rhetoric and then retracted the statements, and then when he realized what was going on, he then invited Sri Lankan professional author Mary Ann Mahanaraj to guest post on his blog. And they didn't like the comments. They didn't like the blog. It says that if you go and read the blog, there's a summarization that concludes the discussion was a good example of racism bingo, which is just them picking buzzwords or discussions that they want to be able to just dismiss because it doesn't fulfill their desires. Anyway, I will link to this article and the other page so you can go through all this information and click all of the links that you want to know more about race veil if you want. In general, to me, it looks like somebody initially said to write somebody unlike you. Just remember that people not like you are also people, and do some research. We've seen the same behavior again and again where it's, wait, no, you need to give me special treatment, because you can't say that that's not asking for special treatment. When someone says, research people that are not like you and treat everybody like humans, when you make that the reason that you throw a fit, that you're being mistreated, something is weird here. And we've seen this. And also when you got this other person over here talking about destabilizing the structures that exist, it's because they are restructuring, recreating something that is completely different from what it is. And we saw the implosion of the RWA that went through this same exact thing last year. This was 10 years ago. And they did the same thing to sci-fi fantasy. And we've seen the fall and the way that the sci-fi fantasy stories themselves have been so much commandeered by social justice politics, by racial politics, by gender politics. And it's killing the stories. Nobody wants to read about that stuff. Except for you people. These few people complaining, which, good on you. Write what you want to write. But stop trying to control other people about any of this. Anyway, I thought it was just interesting to see this background in sci-fi fantasy, because I didn't realize that this had actually happened until recently, and so I thought I would share it with you and get all of your guys' thoughts on the subject of race veil, on the subject of what's outlined in this video, your thoughts on the genres going forward, or on the writing industry going forward, and where you think we're all going, and anything related or in between. So looking forward to your comments and some discussion maybe, and I think that's it for the last video of 2020. Whew. If you enjoy this sort of content, please like it. Just bump that like, share it, subscribe with the red button, share it with your friends. And that is 2020 Kirk Patty Cake signing off, and hope you don't die. See you next week. I already said the thing, but don't die. Thanks for being here. Dear Madam Astra, that's me. We regret to inform you that on August 1st, your employer, Agatha Jane Benedict, owner of the Benedict estate, peacefully passed away in her sleep. Oh, that's so sad. Wait. Let me try that again. Oh my goodness. That's so sad. Yeah, I think I'm ready. With millions of dollars on the line and the opportunity for your every need to be taken care of for life. Tell me, is there anything more valuable than that? I didn't think so. Dead End Drive is a dark comedy novel that makes 3 promises. 1, an illustrious estate in Louisiana. 2, an opulent dinner affair for all in attendance. And 3, and most importantly of all, lots and lots of competitive murder. So if you're looking for a cozy book to settle in with for the spooky season, I've only got one question for you. Will I see you at the will reading?